God's chosen ones, if you feel forgotten and blocked, this is the divine wake-up call to reclaim your breakthrough. They thought they were throwing punches in the dark, sneaky, slick, invisible. But what they didn't realize was that you weren't just another target. You were the flame, and now the fire they lit in secret is burning them in public. They tried to erase you with whispers, build their lies into towers, and clap for your heartbreak like it was theater. But now, those same hands that built false stories are catching the heat. The same words that wounded you are now wrapping around their own lives like chains. And deep down, they know it. They can't sleep. They're restless, and their peace has evaporated into smoke. Why? Because making you their enemy wasn't just wrong, it was cosmic rebellion. Before we go deeper, pause for a moment. If your spirit is stirred, if your past suddenly makes more sense, drop 777 in the comments. That's your confirmation.
That's your agreement with the heavens, that you're no longer playing small. You're stepping into what was always yours. And to those who've supported this message through super thanks, we see you, we honor you. Your kindness doesn't just help this video, it helps awaken more chosen ones to their true identity. Thank you. Now lean in, because this is more than a message. This is a reckoning. They assumed you were fragile, forgettable, an easy detour. They labeled you the villain and believed the universe would co-sign their schemes. But what they didn't know was that you were a divine test, and they failed it miserably. You were the line between grace and ego, and when they crossed it, they activated their own downfall. Do you feel it now? The shift, the silence from those who once shouted against you, that haunting sense in the air that something has returned to its rightful order. That's not paranoia, that's not imagination, that's divine backlash, karma answering with precision. Chosen one, how long will you keep forgetting who you are? How long will you keep explaining away what your spirit already confirmed? You saw the signs, you felt the pressure, you knew the warfare was not just emotional, it was spiritual, and yet, you still whispered, maybe I'm overreacting. You weren't. And here's the part they never wanted you to figure out. They saw your glow before you did. That's why they tried to kill it. Not because you were weak, but because they knew the day you recognized your power would be the day they lost theirs. So no, you're not imagining it. No, you're not being dramatic. And no, this is not just life happening. This is divine protection. This is justice in motion. This is the moment the universe says, enough. And we're just getting started, because what you're about to hear next isn't just truth, it's the confession they never thought would be spoken out loud. Let's begin. God's chosen ones, making an enemy out of you, will go down in history as their greatest mistake. Music. They didn't just make an enemy, they built a monument to their own downfall, a symbol carved not in marble or stone, but in regret. Every insult, every lie, every attempt to sabotage you, all of it is engraved in the very walls they now have to pass daily. And no matter how hard they try to forget, the shame won't let them, because deep down they know it was their own hands that started the fire, and now they're choking on the smoke. What made them think you were easy to break? Was it your silence, your patience, your decision to respond with grace instead of revenge? They thought your softness meant surrender, like the enemies of Daniel who saw him praying and thought he could be trapped in a den of lions. But just like Daniel, you were never unprotected. Heaven was always watching. What they didn't know was that you weren't just someone to provoke. You were a divine shift in motion. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, Joseph said in Genesis 50 verse 20. And the same is true for you. What they plotted to destroy you became the platform where your power was revealed. When they moved against you, they didn't start a rumor, they triggered a reversal. They thought they were pulling strings, but in truth, they were unraveling their own narrative. Have you ever noticed how those who attacked you now live in confusion? Why do their plans seem to backfire? Why do the things they once used to mock you now become their own daily torment? They poked, they plotted, they manipulated your name like it was a toy in their hands. But chosen one, what happens when you touch something sacred without understanding its purpose? What happens when someone tries to handle fire with bare hands? Their world begins to glitch, not because of vengeance, but because of divine order. Galatians chapter 6 verse 7 says it without apology, do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. This isn't punishment, this is return, and return is always precise. Do you remember the weight in your chest when they smiled at you, but you felt something dark behind it? That wasn't imagination, that was revelation. The Holy Spirit was alerting you. Even when your eyes didn't see, your soul sensed the shift. Can you recall the fire that stirred in you whenever they tried to belittle you? That wasn't anger, that was the lion inside you waking up. And still, you didn't lash out. You held your peace, like Jesus before the Sanhedrin. You refused to defend yourself with rage because you knew heaven speaks louder than hate. Even outside scripture, this principle reveals itself. Nelson Mandela, the South African freedom fighter and peacemaker, once said, "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies." The very ones who resented your light are now choking on their own bitterness. Let me tell you about Raphael, a 47-year-old craftsman from a small village. For years he quietly fixed broken tools for others, often for free. Some mocked him for not thinking big, even accused him of stealing customers from their stores. But one day, a foreign entrepreneur driving through town had a car breakdown, and Raphael, without fanfare, fixed it on the roadside. That moment led to an offer, a contract to supply tools internationally. The ones who mocked him now struggle to afford the bolts he once gave away for free. God doesn't forget humility, he multiplies it. And what about nature? Imagine a seed being crushed into the soil. From above, it looks like destruction, but underground, a miracle begins. Roots stretch, stems push upward, and one day it breaks the surface, stronger than anything that tried to bury it. That's you. You weren't buried, you were planted. Why do they feel so uneasy around your name now? Why do they wince when someone praises you? Because their spirit remembers what their mouth denies. They know they tried to destroy someone who was never meant to fall. They know they touched oil that was not theirs to smear. Psalm 105 verse 15 carries a warning they should have heeded. Do not touch my anointed ones, and do my prophets no harm. But it's too late for caution now. The oil has already responded. They tried to cast you as the villain to protect the lies they were living. They needed to point the finger so they wouldn't have to look in the mirror. But truth doesn't stay buried forever. And now, the masks are slipping, the stories are crumbling, and their conscience is louder than any rumor they spread. You, chosen one, were never just a chapter in their drama. You were the divine mirror they couldn't face. And the more they tried to erase you, the clearer your reflection became. But there was one thing they never counted on. Truth doesn't need an army. It doesn't require defense. Truth is like light. It pierces through without effort. And now, the very lie they thought would bury you is collapsing under its own weight. The narrative is reversing. The same mouths that gossiped, slandered, and laughed at your pain have gone eerily silent. Why? Because now they're the ones walking through storms they cannot explain. The pain they once applauded in you has returned to them tenfold. This is not karma dressed up for social media. This isn't some trend they can post their way out of. What's happening now is spiritual consequence, a collapse from within, a disruption they summoned without realizing the magnitude. And your name, chosen one, isn't written in the rubble. It's written in the reason. You weren't just another name they crossed. You were on divine assignment. Have they forgotten what happened when Saul persecuted David? Saul thought he was chasing down a mere shepherd boy, but he was really trying to overthrow the one God had already chosen. And what did Saul gain from that pursuit? Nothing but torment, downfall, and madness. You can't sabotage what heaven has sealed. Have you ever wondered why their plans always seem to fall apart when it concerns you? Why do the lies lose momentum? Why do their group chats turn into battlegrounds of confusion? It's because when someone moves against a soul that is in divine alignment, they're not just fighting flesh, they're fighting flow. The universe protects its investments, and you, chosen one, are not on this path by accident. You were selected, protected, assigned. They set traps confidently, as if the ground beneath them was solid. But no one warned them. When the earthquake is divine, the trap collapses with its creator. And when the dust settles, only one rises, the one who was built through fire. Do you know why they still talk about you in whispers? Why your name still shakes their pride? Because despite every rock they threw, you're still standing, not just breathing, transforming. Every insult they hurled became fuel for your growth. Every betrayal was a chisel that refined your purpose. Every delay you endured was divine training in disguise. You've become something they never imagined, a version of you they helped create but now fear to face. Have you ever noticed how your enemies often look confused by your survival? They stare, wondering, how are you still smiling? How are you still rising? They don't understand the mystery of favor. They don't understand that for you, pain is not the end, it's a beginning. That silence doesn't mean defeat, it means preparation. That isolation isn't exile, it's elevation. They weren't ready for the version of you that pressure revealed, like gold in a furnace or a diamond under Earth's heaviest pressure. You weren't breaking, you were becoming. You're not built like them. You don't crumble. You compress, shift, and then expand. You rise like the phoenix, not despite the fire, but because of it. Let's speak plainly. There were moments, weren't there, where you doubted it all, where you stared at the ceiling and thought, did I deserve this? Did I miss something? They nearly convinced you the pain was your fault, but it wasn't punishment, it was power cloaked in discomfort. That rejection, it was redirection. That loss, it was cleansing. The silence from heaven wasn't absence, it was strategy. You were being hidden, not forgotten. Scripture says in Isaiah 48 verse 10, I have refined you, though not as silver, I have tested you in the furnace of affliction. You were never being destroyed, you were being purified. And not everyone can go where you're going. Some people had to exit your life, not because you failed, but because they couldn't survive the altitude God was calling you to. You carry a frequency not everyone can hold, but in the fog of doubt, you forgot. You shrunk your light to protect their comfort. You silenced your roar to make space for their fear. And heaven watched, not to punish, but to wait for you to remember who you are. So let this be your reminder. You are not lucky. You are aligned. You are not random. You are reckoned with. And those who tried to tear you down are now sitting in the shadow of their own collapse. And this collapse, it doesn't come with warning sirens. It comes with silence. The same silence you once wept in, only now it's their turn. Look at the pattern of history. True chosen ones don't emerge from comfort. They rise from conflict. Oprah Winfrey, once ridiculed for her appearance and background, became the most influential woman in media. Nelson Mandela was locked in a prison cell for 27 years, but that cell didn't hold a prisoner. It refined a president. Malala Yousafzai, a teenage girl silenced with a bullet, rose with a message that echoed around the world. And even now, there are stories still unfolding. I'll tell you about Mateo, a soft-spoken barista from Spain who was mocked by his co-workers for always giving free pastries to the homeless. One day, a customer noticed, returned weeks later, and offered him a partnership in a humanitarian cafe project across Europe. The very kindness they mocked became the bridge to his destiny. And like the wind that cannot be captured, your spirit disrupted their illusion. You weren't their enemy, you were their mirror. And when you walked away, they didn't just lose access to you, they lost the mask they wore in your presence. Never forget, you shift atmospheres just by entering a room. You don't need applause to prove your value. Your existence is proof enough. And when they made you their enemy, they exposed the insecurity they were desperate to hide. This was never about revenge, it's about revelation. And now, the universe and heaven are putting your identity on full display, not just to them, but to you. You're finally seeing yourself clearly. They didn't destroy you, they unveiled you. And in doing so, they revealed their own defeat. A defeat guaranteed the moment they thought they could battle a soul under divine protection. You were their obsession, and now you're the reason they're unraveling. The very fuel they used to stay afloat has become the rope tightening around their peace. They couldn't stop watching you, couldn't stop analyzing your steps, like investigators hunting secrets that didn't exist. They pretended you were insignificant, but behind the scenes, you were the headline of every private thought, every hidden envy. They studied you like a blueprint while telling others you were a mistake. Have you ever wondered why they seem to orbit around your life, like moths drawn to flame, even when they claim to despise the heat? Because your light made them confront their own shadows. Your peace disrupted their chaos. Your consistency exposed their confusion. And instead of facing themselves, they fixated on you. This has happened before. Remember how Saul obsessed over David in 1 Samuel 18? Saul eyed David from that day on. David didn't threaten Saul, he simply walked in favor. He moved with a heart aligned with God, and that alone was enough to torment the king's soul. Because the presence of anointing will always unsettle the insecure. While you were on your knees in silence, healing the pain no one knew about, they were in circles, whispering, stirring smoke, hoping it would choke you out. They didn't see that the fire they tried to ignite wasn't burning you down, it was purifying you like gold. Your soul wasn't breaking, it was becoming. Every insult they tossed became another layer of strength. Every false story made you wiser, and every closed door became a training ground for your destiny. They didn't realize they weren't building a campaign against you, they were building a cage for themselves. The more they obsessed over you, the more they forgot their own identity. Their world began to orbit around your downfall. But when the collapse never came, their own life began to disintegrate, because obsession can't replace purpose. You can't chase destiny while drinking from the cup of jealousy. Have you ever noticed how they gave your name more energy than their own vision? Entire conversations, entire group chats, even fake alliances were built around dissecting your life, your words, your wins, your quiet strength. And still, nothing worked. Why? Because favor can't be fabricated, and your foundation was never built on applause. It was built in the quiet place with God. The Bible says in Isaiah 54 verse 17, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn, not through vengeance, but through endurance." And now, while you walk in the promises God whispered to you in private, they're left exhausted, because they tried to copy your harvest without planting the seed. Let me tell you about Maria, a young school teacher in Brazil who worked tirelessly to help children in poverty. Her peers mocked her for wasting time on underfunded students. But what they didn't know was that one of those children would go on to win a national innovation competition. And in his speech, he named her as the reason he never gave up. That moment launched her into national recognition. The very people who ignored her now try to imitate her. But you can't duplicate heart. Your journey wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was real. And because it was real, it disturbed those who built their identity on illusion. You never meant to threaten them, but your truth did. And as you grew, they cracked. As you healed, they decayed, because envy feeds on insecurity. And when they saw you doing the internal work they weren't brave enough to face, their admiration turned into obsession. And that obsession became the seed of their own undoing. Have you ever seen ivy wrap itself around a tree? At first it looks harmless, even beautiful. But slowly, it chokes the tree's life from the inside out. That's how their fixation on you operated. It was never about you. It was about the emptiness they tried to fill with your downfall. But you kept building. You kept growing in silence. And now, the very foundation they hoped would collapse beneath you is what's elevating you beyond their reach. They never expected you to rise without revenge. But your silence became the loudest response. And still they wonder, how is it that you didn't clap back? How is it that you didn't fall apart? Because you were never fighting them. You were following purpose. You were on assignment. While they scrambled to destroy your name, you were becoming someone they never had the discipline to become. Now they're stuck, not because you cursed them, but because the universe always balances energy, and heaven always keeps receipts. Chosen one, your peace is powerful. Your stillness is sacred. Don't waste your time correcting what God has already exposed. You weren't just a page in their drama. You were the truth that threatened their lie. And now that you're thriving, the fake version of them that survived in your shadow has nowhere left to hide. So move forward, not in spite of their obsession, but because of your calling. And know this, the more they tried to bury you, the deeper your roots grew. And now, your bloom is inevitable. Not even they can look away from it. Let's get real for a moment. Yes, you doubted yourself. And that doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Yes, you looked in the mirror some nights and whispered, maybe they're right, maybe I am the problem. Because when your name gets passed around like currency in conversations built on gossip and projection, it starts to wear on you. When people twist your truth into something unrecognizable, it's hard not to question the light you carry. But let's clarify something right now. They weren't attacking you because you were wrong. They were attacking you because you were real. Authenticity threatens every mask, and your very existence was a mirror that reflected back the illusions they refused to confront. The more honest you became, the more threatened they felt. Have you ever noticed how their noise faded every time you rose? Not because they lost interest, but because they were watching, silently, obsessively. Their silence wasn't peace, it was surveillance. And every win you didn't announce, it still pierced them. Because your growth became a spotlight they couldn't dim. Like the Pharisees watching Jesus perform miracles, they saw the light, but instead of following it, tried to silence it. Not because he was wrong, but because he made their darkness undeniable. The truth is, every time you chose healing over hatred, you exposed their wounds. Every time you walked in purpose instead of pettiness, you disrupted their performance. While you were being rebuilt in secret, they were publicly building their identity on your supposed failure. They used your name to gain approval, to feel superior, to feel seen. But they never realized that foundation was built on sand. Matthew chapter 7 verse 26 speaks of such people. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. And now, the storm has come, not against you, but against the lies they try to live in. And what's happening now? The energy they threw out is folding back in, like a boomerang wrapped in bitterness. It's returning, not delayed, but perfectly timed. The envy they projected into your space is now clouding their own peace. The mockery they cast on your healing is now a silence they can't explain. Their laughter at your tears has turned into trembling in the face of their own storms. Let me tell you about Jonah, not the prophet, but a young man in Italy who spent years being mocked for leaving a high-paying job to start a non-profit for disabled children. His old co-workers laughed, said he was wasting his degree. But one of those same co-workers later had a child with special needs, and that non-profit, it became their only refuge. The one they scorned became the one they needed. It's a pattern we've seen over and over in real life. Take Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks. He was raised in public housing in Brooklyn, often bullied for being poor. When he tried to pitch his vision of a third-place coffee house, he was told it would never work. But his persistence and his refusal to internalize rejection led him to build a global empire that redefined how the world drinks coffee. The ones who dismissed him now serve what he created. Or consider Lady Gaga, mocked in high school for her looks and her eccentric creativity. Many tried to tear her down before she ever rose. But through resilience and relentless authenticity, she not only transformed the music industry, she became a global advocate for mental health and self-worth. The very traits they tried to shame became the foundation of her influence. That's how it works, chosen one. You weren't standing alone, even when you felt isolated. Even when it looked like no one believed you, the universe and heaven stood with you, shielding you from battles you didn't even know were being waged in rooms you never entered. You weren't just healing, you were being positioned. What you thought was abandonment was actually alignment. And now, the shift is visible. The same people who mocked you for being too emotional, too intense, too soft, are now unraveling under pressure they used to claim didn't exist. They called you crazy, now they can't sleep. They said you were dramatic, now their world is imploding under the weight of the very issues they never addressed. Isn't it ironic? The same traits they tried to shame you for are now the very strengths helping you rise. What they rejected in you, they now desperately wish they had within themselves. Have you ever asked why your mere presence triggers people so deeply? Why they flinch when you walk in the room, even when you haven't said a word? It's not you, it's what you represent. You represent the version of themselves they refuse to pursue. You're the path they didn't take, the choice they didn't make, the courage they didn't claim. And now that you've become what they were too afraid to chase, your life is a walking contradiction to their excuses. And you did it without them, without their approval, without asking for permission. That's why they're bitter, because they can't say you owe it to them. And they can't explain away your favor. Now they're trapped in the prison they designed for you. The obsession they fed every day has become a weight too heavy to carry. And their collapse, it's just beginning. Not because of your revenge, but because truth always breaks what was built on lies. And you were never their enemy. You were their wake-up call. But they hit snooze too many times. Chosen one, you were the trigger, and now you're the consequence. Like a sunrise after a long storm, you didn't arrive loudly, but now that you've broken through, there's no going back. You've become the very light they tried to cover. And they're learning the hard way that you can't eclipse someone who carries the sun inside them. They called you crazy, loudly, repeatedly, until even you started to wonder if they were right. They painted you as unstable, volatile, dramatic. not because it was true, but because it served their narrative. They weren't just throwing around insults, they were building a character, scripting a story, and assigning you the role of villain in a play you never agreed to perform in. And yet, look at them now. The same ones who laughed at your tears are refreshing their screens at 2 a.m., checking if you've moved on. They branded your breakdowns as madness while carefully hiding the fact that they had been orchestrating your collapse the entire time. They pulled strings in the shadows, then screamed, "See," when you finally defended yourself. Have you ever asked why they needed your reaction so badly? Because without your response, their story fell apart. They pushed you to the edge and then turned your survival into their spectacle. They used your pain as their proof. And the more you bled, the more believable their lies became. It's a strategy as old as time. Look at the story of Job, a man of integrity who was accused, broken, and mocked, even by those closest to him. In Job 19 verse 5 he says, "If indeed you would exalt yourselves above me and use my humiliation against me," yet God vindicated him. The ones who misjudged Job had to witness his restoration. And that's your story too. Because now, the stage they built to mock you has collapsed. The lights are off, the audience is gone, and the only applause left is the echo of their own conscience. You're no longer speaking, and that silence, it's louder than their entire performance. You didn't just walk away, you removed the oxygen from the fire they used to feed on. They can't scroll without searching for your presence. They can't post without fearing how you might interpret it. They can't even sleep without wondering, what if they've moved on? What if they've actually risen? And here's the truth, you have. You rose, quietly, steadily, powerfully. While they performed, you evolved. Have you ever noticed how unsettled they seem now? How nervous they get when your name is mentioned, even casually? That's not guilt, that's exposure. Because their performance no longer has an audience. Even the people they manipulated are starting to ask questions. The script is unraveling, and now even their own reflection is rejecting the character they played. You weren't the unstable one. You were surviving instability. You weren't reacting irrationally. You were responding to spiritual warfare. You were drowning in manipulation and still trying to keep peace in a world built to suffocate you. And that moment when you chose silence over spectacle, that was the shift. You broke the cycle. You cut off their supply. And now, the silence that once embarrassed you has become the very sound that's tormenting them. Psalm 34 verse 18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." While you were walking on spiritual eggshells, begging God for clarity, pleading for peace, the heavens were gathering every tear, every sigh, every moment you thought you were alone, and preparing restoration in secret. Now, the balance is shifting. The energy they sent out is coming back, not to you, to them. And this pattern, it plays out in real life. Consider Tyler Perry, now a billionaire filmmaker, but once a homeless man laughed at for believing in his own voice. People called him delusional for staging plays that initially flopped. But he kept going, and now he owns the largest film studio in America. The same critics who mocked him now audition for him. Or Britney Spears, once mocked, overexposed, and ridiculed by the very system that crushed her, only for the truth to finally come out. The Free Britney movement didn't just reveal injustice, it exposed the very machinery of manipulation that the world had applauded for years. You see, when lies rule, they need maintenance, constant upkeep. But truth, it rises on its own, just like you did. And now they're stuck, tripping over timelines, scrambling to remember what they said to whom, hoping no one asks the one question they can't answer: why? Let me tell you about Samuel, not the prophet, but a quiet intern at a tech firm. His manager painted him as lazy, detached, unfit. Samuel stayed quiet, stayed late, and kept creating. Months later, a visiting executive noticed his work, traced the code back to him, and promoted him into a position above his former manager. That man, he's now living under the weight of his own lies. That's what's happening now, not through your revenge, but through their unraveling. They're waking up, not with remorse, but with realization. And that realization is haunting, because the lie they loved is slipping. And the person they tried to destroy, you've become living proof that truth never stays buried. So, chosen one, stop second-guessing yourself. Stop replaying scenes that were edited against you. You weren't overreacting, you were enduring. You weren't broken, you were breaking free. And now that you've gone quiet, the noise has finally turned inward. and they can't escape it. They called you crazy, didn't they? Repeated it so often they hoped you'd start to believe it. But look at what's unfolding now. They can't keep their mind still. They're restless, not because of anything you did recently, but because your peace is louder than their noise. They once said you were obsessed, but now they refresh your page at 3 a.m., looking for traces of your joy. They warned others that you were bitter, yet they're the ones replaying old wounds like a song they can't turn off. They swore you were unstable, but now it's their own narrative collapsing like a house built on sand. And the most haunting part? They know you know. You feel it in your spirit, that quiet knowing, that divine confirmation. It unsettles them more than any confrontation ever could. It's the unspoken truth they can't run from. So, chosen one, stop revisiting old memories looking for cracks in your own sanity. Stop second-guessing your strength just because they called your survival unstable. You're not crazy, you never were. What you felt was real. What you lived through wasn't a misunderstanding, it was manipulation, crafted and rehearsed to discredit you while protecting their own mask. Jeremiah 17 verse 10 says, I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind, to reward each person according to their conduct, according to what their deeds deserve. And now, that divine justice is in motion. You were emotional because you were alive. You were expressive because you felt deeply in a world that labels numbness as strength and performance as truth. Your raw humanity felt like a threat. You weren't broken. You were breathing through wounds no one saw. And they didn't know how to handle that, because people who live behind masks are always threatened by those who don't need one. You were clear. You were grounded. And even when they spun your pain into parody, even when they smirked at your tears and clipped your breakdowns into sound bites, you still stood. You still healed. You still held your heart open when it would have been easier to let bitterness rot your soul. Let me tell you about Viola Davis, an Oscar-winning actress who was told early in her career that she was too dark and too intense for lead roles. Many tried to twist her emotional depth into instability, but she didn't shrink. She brought truth to every role, and now her presence commands every room. The very sensitivity they criticized became the power that transformed her industry. Or take John, a therapist I once knew. He was gaslit by his own mentor, accused of emotional fragility, told that empathy was weakness. But over time, clients began to flock to him, not for formulas but for his soul. The very qualities his mentor mocked became the magnet for healing others. One day that same mentor returned, broken, lost, asking for help. You see, healing doesn't scream, it doesn't perform, it doesn't post its victories for validation. Healing whispers, I'm still here. And now that you've reclaimed your silence, your distance, your dignity, they're left with the one thing they tried to avoid all along, the mirror. Their lies required your reaction to stay alive. That's why they needed you to keep explaining yourself, to keep justifying, defending, unraveling, because as long as you fought back, they had something to twist. But now, you cut the line, you left the theater, you burned the script, and your silence is thundering through their mind like judgment they can't outrun. Isaiah 30 verse 15 says, In repentance and rest is your salvation, in quietness and trust is your strength. You found power in stillness, and that stillness now haunts them, because while you're out here rebuilding, rising and resting, they're stuck circling a story that no longer involves you. They scroll, they toss, they overanalyze your last post, wondering what it means. Not because you said too much, but because you finally said nothing. And in that nothing, they heard everything. Have you ever seen how a snake sheds its skin? It doesn't make noise, it doesn't ask permission, it simply outgrows what no longer fits. That's you, and the skin you've left behind, they're trying to wear it like it still belongs to you, but it doesn't. You've moved on, you've evolved, you've outgrown the version of yourself they thought they could contain. And now, their sleepless nights are not fueled by regret, but by recognition. They see who you are now. They feel it, they fear it, because while they were trying to break you, heaven was quietly rebuilding you. This was never about revenge, this was always about restoration. So let them wonder, let them scroll, let them wrestle with the ghost of a control they never actually had. Because the one they mocked for being too sensitive has become the standard. The one they tried to silence has become the signal. You are no longer in the storm, you are the calm after it. And that silence, it's not empty. It's sacred, it's not revenge, it's revelation. And for them, it's deafening. There comes a time when you must stop doubting the very thing that sets you apart, and that time is now. You've been walking through life like you're unsure, as if the fire in your bones could ever be dimmed by rejection or delay. But here's the truth. Your power was visible to your enemies before it was ever visible to you. They saw something in you glowing, even while you were still hiding in the ashes. They studied your movement, your silence, your resilience, while you were too busy asking yourself why the world kept breaking you. Let's be honest now. You did question it. You did ask, why me? When the door slammed in your face, when people you loved vanished without explanation, when another betrayal stabbed you in the back like a dagger made of ice. And you weren't wrong to cry. You weren't weak to wonder. Even Jesus, the Son of God, cried out in the garden, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." Matthew chapter 26, verse 39. Doubt didn't make him less divine, it made him human. And in those human moments, like him, you were being prepared, not punished. You begged heaven for a break. You pleaded for peace. But what if the storm wasn't meant to destroy you? It was meant to distinguish you. What if the winds you thought were pushing you backward were actually sharpening your wings for flight? Imagine a butterfly fighting through its cocoon. If someone tried to rescue it early, it would die, weak. But by struggling, it gains the strength to soar. Could it be that your suffering was divine training? While you were praying for relief, your enemies were praying you'd stay confused. While you were curled up in bed, wondering if you'd ever feel whole again, they were lying awake, tormented by a question they'd never say out loud. What happens if you finally see what they've already seen in you? What happens when you stop explaining away your strength and start walking in it? Let me tell you a story about Nathaniel, a soft-spoken counselor who worked quietly in a school for troubled teens. For years he felt invisible, doubting his calling, wondering if his quiet nature meant he lacked purpose. But what he didn't realize was that the students who mocked him were watching how he never gave up on them. The teachers who criticized his methods were secretly intimidated by the results they couldn't explain. And when Nathaniel finally owned his gift, his influence exploded far beyond those four walls. What changed? He stopped underestimating his power. You've done the same. You've brushed off your transformation as not that deep. You've smiled through wounds that still ached and convinced yourself you were overreacting. You let silence convince you that you were too much. But deep down, you know the truth. You've survived things that could have left you emotionally paralyzed. Abuse, betrayal, isolation, spiritual warfare. Yet here you stand, not just breathing, but becoming. And still you minimized it. But let me remind you, David was underestimated too. His own father didn't even think he was worth calling into the room when Samuel came to anoint the next king, 1 Samuel 16 verse 11. But God saw him. Heaven had already chosen him. And just like David, you don't need validation from those who couldn't see your crown. You've been carrying a kingship they weren't ready to recognize. Now here's the unsettling part. Why do you think their attacks felt so calculated? Why was it always so specific, so targeted, so persistent? That kind of precision isn't born from coincidence. That's not random. That's fear masquerading as cruelty. It's jealousy dressed in spiritual warfare. They saw the divine blueprint over your life and panicked. You weren't just another face in the crowd. You were a disruption to their false sense of control. Steve Jobs, the visionary behind Apple, once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And you were never crazy. You were called. And that calling was loud enough to shake the ground under those who built their lives on shallow foundations. The strategy of your enemies was simple: confuse you. Because a confused chosen one is easier to control. If you're distracted by doubt, you're too exhausted to rise. If you're questioning your identity, you won't reach for your inheritance. And if you're numbing your voice just to be accepted, you'll miss your throne. But here's the twist. They underestimated the hand of God on your life. The very power they feared is now unfolding before their eyes. Like Pharaoh watching Moses split the Red Sea, they're witnessing something they cannot unsee. You're no longer the same, and that's the problem. Not for you, but for everything that tried to break you. So now, the question remains, not for you to ask, but for the world to answer. What happens when a chosen one finally sees what God saw all along? But here's where everything starts to collapse for them. The moment you began to wake up. The moment you looked in the mirror and no longer saw a wounded survivor, but a warrior being refined by fire. You're no longer shrinking. You're no longer apologizing for your light. You've begun to realize that everything you endured wasn't random suffering. It was sacred construction. God was building something within you that this world can't counterfeit. Not talent, not charm, but character, endurance, power. Do you truly think the God who walked with Daniel in the lion's den would walk away from you in yours? That the same hand that lifted Joseph from a pit to a palace would leave you stranded halfway? No. Every heartbreak, every delay, every sleepless night was laying the bricks of a foundation they'll never be able to steal. What's inside you now can't be stolen, can't be imitated, can't be shut down. And now that you're stepping into this truth, finally realizing that silence wasn't peace, it was suppression, something terrifying is happening to those who mocked you. They're quiet now, but not because they found wisdom. They're speechless because they're watching their own words collapse in their throats. The same ones who laughed at your tears are now drowning in their own emotional chaos. The ones who said you were dramatic, they're unraveling under pressure. The ones who said you were lost, they're wandering through life with no compass. This is the moment when everything flips. You used to doubt your power. Meanwhile, they feared it. Now, the very truth they tried to bury has risen in you like a roaring tide, unstoppable, undeniable. And they have to sit back and watch you become what they swore you never would. Not just healed, but whole. Not just rising, but reigning. Let me tell you about Emile, a quiet street artist from France. He used to paint in alleyways just to cope with loneliness. His work was raw, honest, but unseen. For years, he convinced himself he wasn't real talent. Then one day, a wealthy gallery owner found one of his murals, weeping in front of it. That mural now hangs in the Louvre. What changed? Emile stopped seeking permission to exist. So should you. It's time to stop offering access to the outdated version of yourself. You've already outgrown the questions they're asking. You've already healed beyond the words they're throwing. Why are you trying to justify elevation to people who are still surviving in survival mode? When a snake sheds its skin, it doesn't go back to wear the old one just because others preferred it. And yes, stepping into this new season is terrifying. It's always easier to stay small, to hide behind a quiet mask and let others lead while you dim your light. But remember Jonah. He ran from his assignment and ended up in the belly of a fish, not because he was weak, but because God wouldn't let him escape his calling. You too are being summoned into the deep, not to be swallowed by fear, but to be delivered by purpose. The silence you thought would shield you, it nearly strangled you. Staying quiet about your anointing didn't preserve your peace, it threatened your destiny. And now God is saying, speak. Step, stand. This is not the hour to whisper your greatness. It's the hour to walk in it. Why were you chosen? Because you're the one who didn't break when everything tried to shatter you. You didn't need applause to do the right thing. You didn't wait for a committee to validate your calling. You turned grief into guidance, wounds into wisdom, and shame into sacred strength. That's not arrogance, it's assignment. Think of a forest after a wildfire. Everything looks destroyed, but underground, the seeds have already begun to sprout. That's you. What was meant to break you only revealed your unshakable roots. The fire didn't end you, it awakened you. And don't forget this, Gideon was hiding in fear when God called him a mighty warrior, Judges 6 verse 12. He couldn't see it, but heaven already had the blueprint. Just like you, you were chosen, not because you were fearless, but because you were willing to rise despite the fear. Stop asking, why me? Start moving like of course it's me. Who else but you to break generational chains? Who else but you to rebuild from the ruins others were buried in? Who else but you to blaze the trail through battles that left scars you now wear like armor? That's not ego, that's purpose. And purpose doesn't apologize. The very power you tried to bury beneath self-doubt, that's the reason the grave couldn't hold you. That's the reason your enemies failed. That's why their schemes collapsed and their whispers never reached heaven. You are still standing, still shining, still stretching, not because you were lucky, but because you were called. So stop waiting for the world to validate what God already confirmed. Your survival is your testimony. Your calm is your revenge. Your glow is the sign that you made it through the fire without smelling like smoke. And never forget this truth, they saw your light long before you did. That's why they tried to smother it. They knew once you caught a glimpse of who you truly are, nothing could stop you. And now, that moment has arrived. So take the light they feared and own it. Let it blaze, let it burn, not to prove them wrong, but to prove that God was right when He chose you. They didn't break you, they built your legend. And not because they meant to, but because their weapons missed the mark. Every whisper, every act of sabotage, every door they tried to close in your face, none of it took you down. Instead, it shaped you. It didn't crush you, it carved you. You were being refined like gold in a furnace, molded by fire into something they never expected. A living, breathing testament that God's chosen ones are not easily destroyed. They are divinely engineered to endure. Let's get one thing straight. Every hit they threw, it wasn't just opposition, it was training. The betrayal that cracked your heart didn't end your story, it gave it depth. The rejection that felt like failure, it rerouted you toward divine alignment. Just like Joseph, sold by his brothers, falsely accused, forgotten in prison, every injustice he endured wasn't a detour, it was design. In Genesis chapter verse 20, Joseph declared to his brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." The same applies to you. They tried to wear you down with slander, but each insult sharpened your vision. Every time they delayed your opportunity, they were unknowingly giving heaven more time to prepare the stage. They thought they were dimming your light, but all they did was create a darker background so that your glow would shine even brighter. At first, you didn't see it. You thought being nice would shield you from betrayal. You believed that loyalty would be returned, that love would be enough, that kindness would soften their hearts. You stayed soft, you stayed humble, you stayed quiet, even when everything inside you was screaming to be heard. But they mistook your grace for naivety. They confused your patience with passivity. They thought your silence meant surrender. And when you finally said, "Enough," when you stopped allowing access to people who only took advantage of your light, they labeled you the villain. But hear this, being misunderstood is often the final step before being crowned. Jesus was called a blasphemer before he was revealed as Savior. Esther was just a quiet orphan before she became the queen who saved a nation. And you were just surviving until you became the blueprint. Now, you're not a victim, you're a reference point. You are the evidence that what people meant for evil can be reversed by the hand of God. You are the one they now watch in silence, unable to comprehend how you're still standing, how you're still rising. You're the one that proves divine delay is not divine denial, it's divine design. Let me tell you about Helena, a hospice nurse who used to be mocked by her colleagues for praying with her patients. They said it was unprofessional. She nearly stopped. But years later, her patients' families began sharing how those final prayers gave them peace no medicine ever could. Today, Helena trains caregivers across the country. She thought they were tearing her down, but they were creating the very platform that would launch her higher than she imagined. And maybe you've walked through something similar. Maybe it was a supervisor who resented your integrity, a friend who resented your light, a relative who couldn't handle your transformation. They didn't just oppose you, they helped shape you. And every chisel they struck against your soul was being used by the master sculptor to bring out the masterpiece. You were never made to blend in. God didn't design you to be average. That unease you always felt in ordinary places, that was your spirit recognizing misalignment. You tried to fold yourself into a smaller frame, hoping others would love you better if you were less bold. But you weren't called to be palatable, you were called to be powerful. Think of a diamond. It's not formed in softness or silence. It's formed under crushing pressure, buried deep, unseen for years. And yet, when it rises, when it's finally uncovered, it reflects light from every angle. That's you. They thought you were fragile, but you were forming. They thought you were breaking, but you were becoming. Let's call this what it is. They weren't tearing you down, they were carving a monument. Every lonely night laid another brick in your foundation. Every insult was a hammer that God turned into holiness. Every season of silence only magnified your voice. What they meant to bury you under, shame, lies, gossip, became the soil where your destiny took root. I once met a woman named Celeste, a single mother fired from her job for reporting corruption. She spent 2 years cleaning houses to survive. Today, she's the CEO of a non-profit that exposes corporate injustice. The very system that tried to silence her, it accidentally trained her to lead it. That's what God does. He doesn't just restore, he repurposes. So let's put it plainly. They thought they were writing your obituary, but heaven was drafting your origin story. They believed they were ending you, but God was just turning the page to the best chapter yet. And what rises now is no longer afraid, no longer asking for applause, no longer needing approval. What rises now is unstoppable, because real power doesn't come from applause, it comes from pressure. Real authority isn't handed out in comfort, it's discovered in chaos. And your legend, it wasn't built in bright lights. It was born in the dirt, in the places where no one saw you, where no one clapped, where you had to believe in a promise before you had any proof. They thought they buried you, but they planted you. And now you're rising with receipts, with purpose, with a power no one can take credit for but God alone. Have you ever paused, really paused, and asked why it had to happen like that? Why pain chose your doorstep, even when all you ever offered the world was love? Why the people you would have fought for without hesitation became the very ones sharpening their weapons in the dark? It's one of life's most bitter truths. The deepest wounds rarely come from strangers. But here's the twist. Without those wounds, you would have never opened your eyes wide enough to see what was hiding behind the smiles. Without the betrayal, you wouldn't have learned to draw sacred lines. Without the collapse, you would have kept building your future on foundations not strong enough to carry your calling. That heartbreak, it wasn't your ending, it was your awakening. Look at Job. He lost everything, his wealth, his family, his health, and still remained faithful. And in the silence, when no one else understood, God didn't just restore him, He multiplied him, Job 42 verse 10. What if what you thought was abandonment was actually heaven repositioning you? The truth is, the universe, or more precisely the Creator, knew something you didn't. You were never meant to stay inside the small, safe version of yourself they tried to trap you in. You were designed to break molds, not fit them. So don't grieve the path anymore. Don't waste another breath wishing things went differently. Because if it hadn't happened the way it did, you'd still be wasting your strength on people secretly celebrating your downfall. You'd still be shrinking your voice just to be digestible to those intimidated by your light. You'd still be offering loyalty to people who only valued your silence. Their betrayal didn't just hurt, it positioned you. Let's talk about Howard Schultz for a moment, the former CEO of Starbucks. He grew up in a housing project, the son of a truck driver who struggled after a workplace injury. There was no safety net, no open doors, only hardship. But it was precisely that pain that gave him the drive to build a company that offered healthcare even to part-time workers. The betrayal of the system didn't break him, it became his motivation. He didn't just build coffee shops, he built legacy. Sound familiar? Now think about Maya, a midwife in a small mountain village. No, you haven't heard her name. Not yet. For years she was the one people turned to in silence, but never celebrated. One winter, after a wealthy official's wife gave birth under Maya's care, her story went viral for saving both lives without modern tools. She had trained herself by lamplight with borrowed books after being rejected from formal education. Her rejection, that was the fire. The pain, that was her fuel. Now she's training others. They tried to bury her in shame, but she turned her scars into stepping stones. The heartbreak that nearly broke you, it cracked you open, not to ruin you, but to let truth pour in. The delay that left you questioning your worth. That was God pulling you back like an arrow, only so you could be launched forward with greater precision and power. Imagine a volcano. For years it looks quiet, dormant, safe, but beneath the surface, pressure is building. Then, suddenly, it erupts, not to destroy, but to release what's been brewing. That's you. You weren't breaking, you were building. You weren't forgotten, you were forging. And now, you're standing in the middle of the ashes they thought would swallow you whole. But instead of smoke, there's a glow around you that even they can't deny. You didn't just survive, you're radiant. You didn't just move on, you ascended. And here's what burns them most. They were part of the reason you had to fight so hard, and you still won. Not because of them, but in spite of them. That's the part they can't escape. They may try to rewrite the story, but deep down, they know the truth. They gave you the storm, and you learned to sail. They gave you the wound, and you became the healer. They gave you the silence, and you built your voice from it. So don't apologize for becoming a force. Don't explain your elevation. Don't regret the endings. They were invitations. Every door that shut was God whispering, "You're not supposed to be in that room anyway." This is what happens when underestimated souls reclaim their energy. This is what happens when survivors realize they were architects all along. You didn't just rebuild, you rebirthed. You became a living landmark, proof that scars don't stop chosen ones, they shape them. This isn't your comeback, this is your arrival. They didn't break you, they built your legend. And now, they have no choice but to live with that. You may have wondered why everything they plotted against you seems to be falling apart. Not just slowly, but strategically. What if I told you this wasn't coincidence? What if I told you it was divinely customized justice? Not a random series of bad days, not simply poor decisions on their part, but a response calculated and measured to every seed they planted in darkness, the energy they used to misrepresent you, to delay you, to diminish your worth. It's now coming back around, not as general misfortune, but as karma tailored to their name, like a robe they can't take off. Think of Haman in the book of Esther. He built gallows to destroy Mordecai, a man he hated because of his favor with God. But in the end, those very gallows became his own downfall. The irony wasn't by chance, it was divine justice, personalized. And just like that, you are witnessing how God allows time to be the great revealer. Have you started to notice the quiet unraveling in their world? The narrative they shaped around you is beginning to collapse. Their words were once daggers, but now their echoes pierce their own peace. You see, the universe, no, let's call it what it really is, God's divine order, does not operate on impulse. It doesn't act on emotion. It waits until everything is in perfect alignment. You felt forgotten, overlooked, maybe even betrayed by heaven's silence. But all the while, the heavens were writing your vindication with invisible ink. And now, it's beginning to glow. Have you ever seen a spider build its web carefully, strategically? It spins a trap, believing it will catch what it needs. But one gust of wind, one shift in nature's balance, and that web is torn apart. The same happens when people build traps for God's chosen. They forget that divine breath can undo what took them years to construct. There's a woman I once knew, Rebecca, a gallery owner in her mid-30s, who faced a storm of slander from a jealous business partner. Her name was dragged, her art defunded, her clients misled. But she chose silence. 2 years later, her former partner was caught forging client signatures. Every lie turned into legal evidence, and every accusation became a mirror that exposed the truth. Rebecca didn't have to retaliate. Truth found its way, and her favor returned sevenfold. David, too, was pursued relentlessly by Saul, who envied the anointing he carried. Saul twisted David's image, called him a threat to the kingdom, and hunted him with hatred. But God allowed time to reveal everything. Saul's empire crumbled by his own hand, while David rose, not by revenge, but by righteousness. Isn't that what's happening in your life right now? The same people who thought blocking your doors would break your destiny are now watching those doors swing open without their permission. And what about their accusations, the ones they whispered in circles you weren't even allowed to enter? They called you dramatic, too sensitive, untrustworthy. They painted you with colors that never matched your soul. But slowly, their own stories are fraying at the seams. Even those who once believed them are beginning to step back. The silence around them isn't peace. It's the sound of people pulling away in quiet realization. There's a saying by Martin Luther King Jr., one of history's great prophetic voices: the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. That's what you're seeing, not immediate retaliation, but inevitable restoration. Let me tell you about Daniel, a software engineer in his 40s. Just months ago, his promotion was sabotaged by a colleague who leaked false complaints. Daniel said nothing. Instead, he kept refining his skills, praying quietly, staying faithful. Unexpectedly, the company was audited, and every fabricated report was traced back. That same week, Daniel was promoted beyond the very department that tried to bury him. Coincidence or divine calibration? And you, God's chosen one, you may still be waiting for your full vindication. You may feel the urge to question why it took so long. But remember this, God wasn't just preparing their fall, He was preparing your rise. He wasn't just revealing their motives, He was revealing your identity. Like a butterfly that struggles inside its cocoon, the resistance you faced wasn't punishment, it was preparation. The struggle created your wings, and now, while they're stuck in the webs they spun, you are learning how to fly. This isn't just karma, it's divine symmetry. a perfect balancing of what was broken and a return of what was stolen. And history, yes, history, will remember that making an enemy out of you wasn't just a mistake. It was their greatest regret. They thought turning you into an enemy would be their winning move, but history will remember it as their greatest mistake. What they didn't understand is that when someone wages war against a soul aligned with divine purpose, they're not just attacking a person, they're provoking a spiritual law. And the consequence of that law, it never forgets. Let them say it's just a rough patch, that it's bad luck or poor timing. They'll blame the economy, relationships, childhood trauma, or anything but the truth. But you see it differently now. You've been watching the signs. You've seen how their misfortunes line up too perfectly with the very seeds they sowed in secret. This isn't just a streak of chaos, this is karma. And it's not generic, it's tailored, like a suit stitched from their own actions. It fits them flawlessly. Just like Haman in the book of Esther, he built gallows for a man of God, never knowing he'd hang from them himself. Esther 7 verse 10. The trap he set became his own downfall. Doesn't that pattern seem familiar? The same gossip they used to bury your name is now burying theirs. The same lies they whispered in the dark are now screaming in their life, like alarms that won't stop ringing. What they thought was a clever scheme has become their own undoing. And here's the irony that twists like a knife. They believed they had time. They thought the silence was approval, that God wasn't watching. But justice doesn't rush. The universe doesn't panic. Heaven waits for perfect timing. Not to destroy, but to reveal. Because the truth always returns, not as a whisper, but as a storm. Have you noticed how quiet they've gotten lately? The ones who used to shout about your flaws are now hiding from their own consequences. The same people who used your name as a punchline can't even look you in the eye anymore. Why? Because they're discovering what you already knew. God defends his chosen in ways that don't require revenge, just alignment. You didn't expose them, you didn't fight back. While they were scheming, you were healing. While they were building walls, you were building wings. That's why they can't understand how you're still rising. They don't realize that when you're chosen, your elevation is not determined by their sabotage. It's written in heaven. I once met a woman named Dia, a quiet high school art teacher in a small town. Her co-workers tried to have her removed, claiming she was unfit, mentally unstable. She never fought back. She just kept showing up, loving her students, doing her work. Years later, every accuser was dismissed for scandals of their own. And Dia, she was named Teacher of the Year statewide. She didn't raise her voice once, but her life spoke volumes. You remind me of that, not because your journey was easy, but because your silence was powerful. You never had to drag them online or craft revenge plots. You just let go. And in doing so, you released divine judgment into motion. Not with malice, but with maturity. Think of the butterfly. It never argues with the caterpillar about whether or not it will fly. It simply transforms. And that transformation silences everything. You are the butterfly now. Your wings are your response. What you're seeing isn't just collapse, it's correction. This isn't cruelty, it's consequence. Every jealous glance, every fake smile, every conversation where they used your name like a weapon, it was all energy. And energy, when sent out with intent, doesn't disappear. It circles, it waits, then it returns. Even Pope Benedict XVI once said, "Truth is not determined by majority vote. The truth doesn't need permission, it just waits for its hour." And for those who lied about you, that hour has come, quietly, but completely. You may still feel tempted to check their updates, to scroll through their filtered happiness, to wonder if they've escaped justice. But you already have your answer. That uneasiness you feel when thinking of them, that's not bitterness, that's discernment. You sense what they're hiding. Their life is glitching. And those delays they caused in your life, the blocked calls, the missed opportunities, the subtle sabotage, they thought it slowed you down. But in reality, it just gave heaven more time to reposition you. Let me tell you about Marcus. Just a few months ago, he was fired from a job by a boss who feared his potential. That same boss mocked Marcus for dreaming big. But Marcus didn't fight, he just moved in silence. Today, Marcus owns a startup that's expanding across 3 countries. And his old boss? He applied for a job there without realizing it was Marcus's company. Some would call that karma. Marcus calls it God's alignment. This isn't just a story of someone getting what they deserve. This is you witnessing divine justice unfold in real time. Because you didn't just survive, you were being preserved. And now, in their absence, your light has space to shine without resistance. Their chaos doesn't surround you anymore, it surrounds them. Even when they smile, you can feel it. There's a crack in their energy, a tightness in their spirit. That's what it feels like when consequences collect interest. And still, you're not bitter. That's what sets you apart. You didn't wish harm, you just wished peace. You didn't demand repayment, you just stepped back and let truth do the talking. That's why you win. That's why their greatest mistake wasn't what they said or did, it was who they targeted. You, God's chosen one, keep walking, keep glowing. Because what's happening right now isn't random, it's sacred, it's strategic, and it's stunning. You're not witnessing their destruction, you're witnessing the full weight of truth landing gently at your feet, silent, sure, and right on time. Let them call it bad luck, but you'll call it what it really is, karma, custom delivered. They thought it was just a coincidence that things were falling apart for them because of bad timing, poor decisions, or simply an unfortunate season. But deep inside you could feel it. It wasn't random, it was precise, tailor-made, measured to the ounce, aligned to the heartbeat. This wasn't chaos, this was karma, custom stitched to their soul like a designer suit. They laughed when they should have been silent. They whispered lies behind your back and expected to walk away untouched. But now, the same darkness they sent out is curling back like a boomerang in the night, silent, swift, and accurate. Just like the Bible says, do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap, Galatians 6 verse 7. Have you ever watched someone who once danced in your downfall suddenly stumble with no clear cause? That's not misfortune, that's divine alignment. When someone targets a soul covered in God's hand, every arrow they shoot becomes a future wound for themselves. What they sent out in shadows now walks boldly in their daylight. Let me tell you about Adira, a woman who built a wellness empire online. Her glow was magnetic, her story powerful. But what many didn't know was how many times she was slandered by competitors who couldn't mimic her essence. One of them started rumors, created fake accounts, and poisoned partnerships with lies. Years later, that same person lost everything in a public scandal. No one knew you could trace it back to Adira because she never said a word. She just kept building, kept shining. Because light doesn't argue with darkness, it just exposes it. You didn't need revenge. You didn't post cryptic quotes or subtweets. You didn't clap back. You simply disappeared. And that was the earthquake. Your absence wasn't hollow, it was holy. Without your light, their shadow started consuming them. Have you ever seen a tree try to block the sun from a seed that was chosen to grow? It's useless. The seed always finds a crack in the concrete, and that's what you did. They tried to delay you, but you kept rising, quietly, patiently, until the same barriers they placed for you became prisons for them. And now, they're stuck, circling, glitching, confused by how everything that once worked for them has turned cold. They don't realize the energy they used to suffocate you is now choking their own momentum. King Saul once believed David was the threat. His envy turned him paranoid. But David never sought revenge. He let God handle what he could have easily fought in the flesh. And how did it end? Saul's downfall came not by David's hand, but by his own unrepentant heart. What about today? World-renowned artist Frida Kahlo once said, "At the end of the day, we can endure much more than we think we can." You endured it all. The lies, the smears, the gossip. But what they didn't calculate is that endurance builds strength. And now, you're stronger, wiser, and untouchable. This isn't about punishment, it's about correction. The universe doesn't rush, it calibrates. You wanted vindication years ago, but God wasn't finished perfecting your rise. The delay wasn't denial, it was divine orchestration. And maybe you've wondered, why did justice take so long, but can you see it now? Their life is falling apart, piece by piece, and you're not even in the picture anymore. That's the power of God's protection. You didn't curse them, you just left. And your silence was louder than their entire campaign. Now, let's go deeper. They're not even fighting you anymore. They're fighting their own reflection. They thought your glow was arrogance, your boundaries bitterness, your rise entitlement. But you weren't the problem, you were the mirror. You didn't destroy them, you revealed them. And what they saw in your light was everything they refused to heal in themselves. Just like when Jesus walked into the synagogue and the demons inside people cried out without him saying a word, your presence stirred up what they buried. They weren't offended by you, they were terrified of being seen. That's why, when you stepped away, their world unraveled. You didn't have to lift a finger, truth did all the work. Have you ever noticed how people who called you toxic now can't keep a relationship? How the ones who said you were unstable are now caught in their own emotional chaos? That's not a coincidence. That's Romans chapter 12, verse 19. In action, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And let me share a story. David, a small tech entrepreneur, once helped a rising CEO launch her brand. She used him, outshone him, and discarded him. Years later, when her company faced a PR disaster, the only person who had the insight to save her was David. But by then, he had built something greater and was already gone. They thought you were disposable, but your exit was their expiration date. And now they're haunted, not by spirits, but by their own decisions. Their conscience is screaming, and there's no mute button for that. You see, you can block a person, but you can't block conviction. You can mute a phone, but not a soul echoing with regret. So, chosen one, don't look back. Don't wish them well or wish them harm. Just walk forward in truth. Keep building, keep glowing. Because this isn't destruction. It's justice dressed in silence. And while they call it bad luck, you call it what it is, karma, custom delivered, wrapped in truth, signed by heaven. They told the world it was just bad timing, just a rough patch, just a streak of bad luck. But deep down, you always knew this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't random. It was karma, custom made, hand delivered, and wrapped in the very energy they once aimed at you. You see, chosen one, what they called bad luck was never luck at all. It was a divine recalibration. Just like Haman in the book of Esther, who built gallows for Mordecai but ended up hanging on them himself, they too are now surrounded by the traps they set. The energy they spread, gossip, manipulation, false kindness, was never floating aimlessly. It had a destination, and now it's arrived with their name on it. Karma isn't chaos, it's correction, not rage, but restoration. The universe, just like God's law, doesn't shoot darts in the dark. It measures, waits, watches, and then, with chilling precision, it returns what was sown. Pressed down, shaken together, and running over Luke 6, verse 38. Imagine a tailor crafting a garment, not for beauty, but for justice. That's what this karma looks like. Not one size fits all, no, it's sewn from the thread of their own intent, lined with every whispered lie, every fake smile, every silent sabotage. And now, it fits them perfectly. Do you remember what Joseph said to his brothers after they sold him into slavery? You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Genesis 50, verse 20. That's what's happening now. While they believed they were writing your ending, God was scripting your elevation. They tried to define your story through their lies, called you unstable, labeled you bitter, painted your passion as rage and your discernment as paranoia. But every insult, it was a seed, and now that garden has bloomed, only it's in their yard and the fruits are bitter. Let me tell you about Miguel, a young creative director in Los Angeles. A few months ago, he was betrayed by a colleague he considered family. This man took Miguel's ideas, claimed credit, and tried to block his promotion. But Miguel didn't fight back, he chose silence. And today that colleague is under investigation while Miguel is designing for global brands. How? Because integrity always outlives manipulation. Just like that, your silence is not weakness, it's strategy, it's alignment. You're not plotting revenge, you're protecting your peace. You walked away, and yet, your absence became their downfall. Because your light wasn't just comforting, it was convicting. And now, they're not fighting you, they're fighting their reflection. You're no longer in the ring. You're no longer the target. You've become the mirror, and that's far more terrifying. They called your boundaries bitterness, your elevation arrogance. But in truth, you were their spiritual mirror. You exposed the holes in their false confidence, their performative peace, their counterfeit compassion. And when you removed your energy, the illusion shattered. Their applause faded. Their supporters vanished. Their truth came knocking. Have you ever noticed how a tree casts its longest shadow when the light is brightest? That's what happened when you stood tall. Your growth made their darkness visible. Not because you attacked, but because you existed. Let's talk real. They didn't hate you, they hated what you revealed in them. That's the secret no one admits. Your calm unsettled their chaos. Your purpose triggered their insecurity. Your authenticity made their mask itch. And now that mask is falling. The very people who clapped for their lies are now whispering doubts. Their alliances, built on falsehood, are crumbling. They thought they had time. They thought karma would forget. But karma isn't late, it's patient. Remember the story of Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5? They lied, not to people, but to God. And when the truth surfaced, it wasn't a public trial. It was a divine consequence, quiet, sudden, undeniable. Just like now. You've probably asked yourself, why didn't this happen sooner? Why didn't the truth explode when I was breaking down in private? Because timing matters. God didn't just want them to fall, He wanted you to rise first. And rise you did. Now, they're drowning, not in curses, but in the chaos they created. They wanted attention, now they have it, in the form of consequences. They created storms, and now the thunder lives in their thoughts. You never wished harm, you never fought back, and that's what haunts them the most. Because how can someone fall when you never even pushed? Do you feel that shift in the atmosphere, that silence filled with justice? That's not coincidence, that's correction. I'll tell you about Alina, a single mother and former nurse who was falsely accused by a jealous supervisor. She lost her job, her home, and nearly her faith, but she never lashed out. Today, she runs a thriving home care agency. That supervisor, they're under legal review. What happened? Karma took the long road, but it didn't miss the turn. Just like the seasons know when to change, your justice arrived right on time. And chosen one, let's be clear, their downfall is not your victory, your growth is. Their chaos is not your focus, your peace is. Don't watch their storm, tend your garden, like the butterfly that never looks back at its cocoon. You're not here to revisit what once trapped you, you're here to fly, and their confusion, that's just the wind you've outgrown. This isn't vengeance, this is vindication, not loud, not violent, but holy. They called it bad luck, but you know what it really is, karma. Custom designed, spiritually aligned, and heaven approved. And now, as this word settles into your spirit, remember this. You didn't just survive their schemes, you evolved because of them. What they tried to bury you with became your soil. What they used to silence you became your signal. Their betrayal lit the fire, but you forged the crown in its flame. If this word spoke to you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop 77 in the comments to claim your growth and confirm your light. Share this with another chosen one, because when the truth is revealed and healing multiplies, no lie can stop the rising. You're not witnessing their collapse, you're watching justice dressed in divine silence, and it has your name written in glory. Keep rising. They thought they could rewrite your story, but every attempt only deepened the ink of your destiny. They believed their whispers would outlast your worth, that their schemes would bury your shine. But chosen one, the universe doesn't forget its stars. The heavens don't misplace their anointed. Every tear you shed in secret was counted. Every wound you carried was seen, and every moment you thought you were forsaken was a step toward your coronation. They didn't break you, they built the stage for your unveiling. Have you ever noticed how the loudest voices against you often fall silent first? The ones who swore you'd never recover, who laughed at your stumbles, now stumble themselves in the quiet of their own unraveling. It's not because you cursed them or clapped back. It's because truth doesn't need a megaphone. It carries its own weight. Like a river carving through stone, it moves slowly but relentlessly, reshaping everything in its path. That's what's happening now. Their lies are eroding, their masks are cracking, and their carefully crafted narratives are dissolving like sandcastles against the tide. Let me tell you about Sarah, a young poet from a small coastal town. Her words were raw, her heart open, but her peers mocked her vulnerability, calling her dreams unrealistic. They spread rumors, twisted her poetry into parody, and laughed when she shared her vision of publishing. But Sarah kept writing, pouring her soul into every line. One day, a traveling literary agent stumbled upon her work in a local cafe. Her poems are now taught in schools, and her name is celebrated in circles her critics will never enter. The same ones who tried to silence her voice now live in the shadow of her words. That's you, chosen one. Your voice, your light, your truth. It's outlasting every lie they told. Why did they target you so fiercely? Because your existence was a threat to their illusion. Your authenticity exposed their pretense. Your resilience reminded them of their fragility. They didn't attack you because you were weak. They attacked you because they saw a strength in you they could never replicate. Like a lighthouse standing firm against crashing waves, you were unshakable, even when you felt like you were crumbling, and now the storms they sent your way are turning back on them. Not because you wished it, but because divine order demands balance. The Bible says in Psalm 23 verse 5, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Notice it doesn't say you fight your enemies to earn the table. It says God prepares it. Your job was never to prove them wrong. It was to trust the one who's writing your story. And that table, it's set now. The feast is ready, and the ones who tried to starve you are watching from the sidelines, unable to touch what's yours. They thought they could block your blessings, but they didn't realize blessings don't need their permission. Heaven has already signed the order. Have you ever seen a tree struck by lightning? From the outside, it looks destroyed, charred, broken, lifeless. But beneath the surface, its roots are still alive, drawing strength from the earth. Sometimes, the strike even sparks new growth, forcing the tree to stretch deeper and rise stronger. That's you. The lightning of their betrayal, their lies, their sabotage. It didn't kill you. It sparked something new. You're not just surviving, you're thriving, with roots so deep no storm can uproot you. And they're left staring at the scorched ground of their own choices, wondering why their plans never took root. They called you too much, too loud, too sensitive, too bold. But what they really meant was you were too real for their comfort. Your light exposed the cracks in their facade, and instead of fixing themselves, they tried to dim you. But chosen one, you weren't made to be dimmed. You were made to illuminate. Like the sun, you don't apologize for shining, and you don't shrink to make the shadows feel safe. The more they tried to cover you, the brighter you became. And now, your glow is undeniable, even to those who once turned away. Let me share a story about Caleb, a carpenter in a rural village. He was known for crafting furniture with care, often giving pieces away to those in need. His generosity drew scorn from competitors who accused him of undercutting their business. They spread lies, claiming his work was shoddy, hoping to ruin his reputation. But Caleb kept working, pouring love into every chair, every table. One day, a city designer visited the village and saw his creations. Now Caleb's work is showcased in galleries across the country, while those who slandered him struggle to sell their wares. His kindness wasn't weakness, it was his weapon. And your grace, chosen one, is yours. Why do their lives feel so heavy now? Why do their smiles look forced, their words hollow? Because the weight of their own actions is catching up. They sowed seeds of discord, and now they're reaping a harvest of unrest. They thought they could plant lies and grow power, but the ground of truth always rejects what's false. Galatians 6 verse 8 says, "Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life." You sowed in tears, in faith, in silence. And now your harvest is blooming, rich, radiant, and rooted in divine purpose. They didn't expect you to rise like this. They thought their words would chain you, their rejection would cage you. But chains don't hold a soul aligned with heaven, and cages can't contain a spirit set free by God. You're not just walking, you're soaring. And every step you take, every height you reach, is a reminder to them that they didn't destroy you, they defined you. They didn't break your story, they gave it chapters. Every scar they left is now a map, guiding others to the strength you found in the fire. Have you ever wondered why their chaos seems to amplify when you're at peace? It's because your calm is their contrast. Your joy is their mirror, reflecting back the emptiness they tried to ignore. Like the moon that shines brightest in the darkest night, your light stands out against their shadows. They thought they could outshine you by shouting louder, but real light doesn't compete, it simply exists. And your existence, chosen one, is a sermon they can't unhear. Let me tell you about Aisha, a young chef who poured her heart into her small restaurant. Her competitors mocked her for using traditional recipes, calling her food outdated. They spread rumors about her ingredients, hoping to drive customers away. But Aisha kept cooking, infusing every dish with love. One day, a food critic dined there by chance and wrote a glowing review that went viral. Now, Her restaurant is booked months in advance, and those who mocked her are closing their doors. Her authenticity wasn't a flaw, it was her foundation. And your truth, chosen one, is yours. The truth is, they never hated you. They hated the reflection of what they could have been, your courage to keep going, your refusal to bitter, your choice to heal instead of harm. It exposed their lack. They didn't attack you because you were beneath them. They attacked you because you were beyond them. And now, as you rise, their world feels smaller. Not because you took anything from them, but because they gave away their peace when they chose to fight you. The Bible reminds us in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Every plot against you, every lie they told, every door they slammed, God was weaving it into your triumph. They thought they were writing your defeat, but God was editing your victory. And now, the final draft is unfolding, and it's more glorious than they could have imagined. They're not your enemies anymore, they're your evidence. Evidence that God turns ashes into beauty, pain into purpose, and betrayal into blessing. They're living proof that no weapon formed against you shall prosper, Isaiah 54, verse 17. And you're living proof that the chosen don't just survive, they shine. So don't look back to measure their fall. Look forward to claim your rise. The table is set, the feast is yours, and the ones who tried to keep you hungry are learning that you can't starve a soul fed by heaven. Keep walking, chosen one. Keep glowing. The world is watching, not just to see their collapse, but to witness your coronation. You're not just a survivor, you're a sovereign. Not just a warrior, you're a wonder. And the story they try to end is only just beginning. Let them call it coincidence. Let them call it chance. But you call it what it is, karma, custom crafted, heaven sent, and written in the stars. Your light is your legacy, and no one can dim what God has destined to shine.